not walking behind the man, like, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And then, say African Americans or just slaves in general, were able to just do anything
Exactly.
other than work for someone else.
Exactly.
They could read.
Yeah.
Woo, you can have a book now.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
So I always felt like it was it was really a big hurdle during that time frame, and a really big or important bridge that was crossed.
Exactly.
The other thing I want to just say that the baby boomers were the most educated group.
Oh, okay.
And that's because education at this point was now more available.
That's true.
And if you think about it, the parents of the baby boomers grew up where education was a privilege. So it was very important for them to make sure that their kids had that education.
Right. And I think they probably promoted the baby boomers and made, almost like, enforced it.
Right.
That, we couldn't.
Exactly.
And so we want you to, So I think that was a great thing.
Right.
To motivate us to, to be educated.
Which is exactly, I actually wanted to say this in the beginning, but the phrase about how each generation, actually the actual phrase, we were talking about the phrase, I was saying how each generation affects the other, but the actual phrase was, each generation blames the one before.
That's true.
That was the actual phrase.
Right.
But the funny thing was, if you think about it, that phrase really was based on the negative stuff.
That's true.
But there was really a lot of positive stuff. There really was. So, I mean, I don't know, whoever thought of that quote, I don't know if that was really the basis that it was kind of a negative thing. It was used, well, from my experience, it was used as a negative kind of thing. But maybe the person who thought of that, or the first person to say it, wasn't necessarily thinking that way. They were thinking, they blamed the one before for something good.
Right.
The word blame doesn't always come off as positive.
That's true.
But so
the next
generation is Generation X, and that would be me. And we were known as the me decade.
Does that feel funny doing that?
Yeah, it kind of does. But I would say that refers to what's in it for me.
Yes.
The yuppie movement, and then the first fax machine. So technology was kind of moving along, but it was still, I mean, if you look at it from the way it is now and how things transition from year to year, how the iPad was out 2 years ago or a year ago, and we have a whole new version like a year later. Meanwhile, it took 20-something years to go from, from one thing, from a pager to the fax.
Yes, that's true.
And think about how the fax has evolved. I mean, they used to be the shiny paper. If you smudged it, forget it. Whatever was transmitted, it's gone.
That's right.
That kind of thing. Meanwhile, now, I know where I work, we don't even have a fax machine.
Wow.
Or we have it, but we don't use it. Right. Everything is scanned, and you can do the fax through kind of Outlook.
That's true.
It's very different. But anyhow, Gen X, some of the characteristics, they want structure or direction. And we were talking about something about that, but we'll go back to that.
Right.
They were more informal opposed to the mature generation who was formal. And it's funny, even back to that, I felt like there's sometimes, and this is just my opinion, obviously, but the mature and Generation X kind of butted heads a lot. And, I mean, right there, they were formal, we were informal. I mean...
The mature, you mean the baby boomers?
No, the mature.
The mature and Generation X.
Yeah, the mature were more formal.
Okay, got you.
They were more formal.
So that's when they looked at them like, oh, my God.
Like, what has the world come to?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's the way it used to. I remember hearing that.
Exactly. Did I say that?
No.
Well,
maybe. Maybe at one point. But Gen X also, they were interested in a life outside of work.
Okay. So that workaholic thing.
Well, right, the hardworking, the workaholic, and not even to say that they weren't hardworking, but they realized there was a life outside of work,
right?
Which probably triggered from they were the kids that were at home where the dad was working until 8 or 9. Right, 8 or 9 o'clock. I think that was beginning
the latchkey kids too.
It was exactly. But they had parents that both worked, so they came home.
Right.
But as far as life outside of work, they had parents that, may have worked till 7, 8, 9, 10, however, time of day, workaholics, and weren't home. So these people, this generation actually cherished, having that balance, being able to be home with your family, but still go to work and pay the bills.
That's true.
That's true. Again, just how one affects the other. They were adaptable to change. They didn't necessarily like it. We didn't necessarily like it, but we were adaptable. I think, at one point you have to.
Because I remember even just a personal example when I was working and going to school, and then you guys basically had to, you know, take care of yourself. And that, you know, when I look back on it, we've talked about this, you know, on a personal note. I felt almost guilty to a point, but my heart of hearts was I was doing what I need to do to better my family at that time. Right. So you guys adapted. You adapted. You did what you had to do. You know.
And you know,
with instructions.
Right. No.
And phone calls.
It wasn't instructions. It was what not to do. You know, like Brenda in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It's funny because we in church the pastor was talking. She was talking and whatever, but she had a story where she burned down her kitchen.
So it brought back memories. Huh?
Brought back memories, but it also helped me realize that I wasn't the only one that burned down.
Right. But you know, it's interesting too because I talked to someone else about this topic recently, and they were saying how, you know, we almost gave this impression to Generation X that you couldn't do what we did. Right. That the baby boomers did this, we did that, we fought this, we fought that. Right. And we almost made you, and even the tone of saying you guys were Generation X almost gave you a tone of that you were nothing, or you were like being X'd out. Or, so they kind of call you sometimes the lost generation as well. And, you know, not that they all are lost, but it kind of gave that connotation that was something wrong.
Well, all right, or that we were talking about that we weren't maybe as, I don't know if ambitious is the right word, or if we were as successful, or if we were as motivated, or, you know, whatever. The other thing is we were also, I'm kind of skipping around, but Generation Y was almost kind of I don't know if I want to say the opposite of baby boomers. They grew up in a technological world. Right. So,
the next generation, which is Generation Y.
Generation Y. Okay. They grew up in a technological world, so things were easier. It was a little more efficient, but things were easier, and, you know, workaholic. I mean, you could probably still be considered a workaholic, but it was easier to do that.
Exactly.
Because you could answer an email, or you can, you know, have a phone conference on your cell phone, in the car, on the way to another meeting.
Exactly.
And I don't know, but I guess with Gen Y, and I kind of skipped because I did have something else about Gen X, but I just feel like Gen X kind of was in the middle of this generation that kind of did this great hurdle, or leaped this great hurdle, but then in between this other generation who was very tech savvy, we were kind of in the middle trying to learn about technology, still trying to keep up with the baby boomers who were doing so much to change the world, as well as adapt to the change and understand how the world goes.
Exactly. So it was a lot.
I think it was a lot, and you're right. It's funny because there's so many different, like say, Professor X. Good Lord, X-Men. And
you're right.
X-Men, they were mutants. They were rejected. They weren't necessarily accepted.
That's true.
They were kind of hidden, you know, and all that. So yeah, Gen X a lot of times does kind of make you feel like they were correlated to something that was, you know, bad or you know,
but
not
you know,
normal.
I also think about too, coming as a baby boomer, coming out of that, you know, generation where we didn't have much, and we were, because we came out generation where basically we were. Some of us was kind of PO, you know, the POO.
Right, but you also grew up where there were like 16 kids.
Yes, yes,
like every family had at least 5 kids or more.
But the great thing about that's talking about the negative and the positive. The great thing about the mature generation, they could take a little and make much out of it.
They sure could.
You know,
right?
And then they kind of showed us that way, because I remember doing that with, you know, growing up as a mom with you. But at the same time, too, I think we felt like we wanted to provide for you because our parents didn't have the means to provide for us. Right. So we want to get to that place where we want to provide for you. So I think that kind of made you maybe lax to the point where, not to say we spoiled you, but we wanted to give you, to kind of get you to a place where you didn't feel like you had to do as much, maybe. I don't know.
Well, also, your generation also kind of were the generation where the parents were much tougher discipline wise. I don't know, but in your age, do they still do stuff like